Denver's pretty high on the list of teams they don't want to see. They catch you sleeping for 1 second, they're at the rim. You're screwed. It's too late. That pass has already been made, and Peyton Watson is already dunking it.
I think the size bleeds into other advantages that they could create. So if they decide to play fast in transition, the size can kind of augment that particular advantage. If they're willing to shoot, eventually they were closing out to Peyton or just making the shots anyway.
We know that these guys have to shoot. If a couple of them make their threes, we got a pretty good shot because we got Nikola Jokic letting the help come off of the weak side and hitting that open shooter. It's like, that's their game. Against OKC, that scares me because I have not seen a willingness to adjust.
It's really nice to hear a Thunder fan talk about it like that. You know, Denver, like every time I think they're out, they pull me back in, right? Like you can never really count this team out.
For OKC and Denver, we're going to go blow for blow. My best look versus your best look.
Yep.
Just heavyweight title fight.
Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean here with our prodigious guest from the Alex Hoops YouTube channel. How are you doing today, Alex?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here, talk some Thunder Nuggets, and appreciate you guys having me on. I'm really excited for this.
No, we're really excited to talk about the Denver OKC matchup with you. I know from both your YouTube channel and your Twitter timeline how detailed you are in breaking down games. So I thought, especially for this particular matchup that is very, I think, interesting, both schematically and philosophically, that you'd be, a great guest for this topic. So in the first game of this baseball series, the Thunder really put it to Denver in that fourth quarter where they really led, I believe, most of the game. Denver led early, but then the Thunder really took control of the game. And, Denver was kind of keeping it close, but then in that fourth quarter, you just saw them turn the Jets up, really clamp down. And then Denver just couldn't stop them on the other end. I think felt like all of Oklahoma City's threes came in that fourth quarter. And then, of course, the complete opposite game happened the next day where all of Denver's threes came in the fourth quarter, and they did the same thing that Oklahoma City did to them the day before. I want to start by talking about the Thunder matchup more conceptually. In your opinion, what are Denver's main matchup advantages, against the Thunder, particularly offensively, because at this point, defensively is a big question for Denver in any matchup. What is it that you guys do well here? But offensively, they were able to put up numbers even in that first game through three quarters, right? Of course, OKC clamps in the fourth, but it was okay, well, they're getting stuff here, right? And I even thought, late, they were getting a lot of great looks and just missing. So what is it about the way that Denver was playing offensively that, seemed to, at least in the second game, eventually overpower this generational defense that the Thunder have?
So one big aspect, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is a major advantage, but I do want to touch on it because I do think it's a factor, and I do think in a playoff setting, it's an extremely important factor. This idea of rhythm, and especially in a back-to-back setting where you're playing the same team on the road 2 days in a row, same gym, same atmosphere, same context, 2 days in a row. You look at the fact that OKC was helping off of the same guys, and those guys, when you consistently help off of them and they're willing to take the shots, there will come a time, it may not happen in those two games, but there will theoretically come a time where that shooter that you're helping off of is going to start making his threes. It's a statistical law that it will eventually happen. They will eventually start falling. OKC has a bad habit of living and dying by, we're helping off of this guy no matter what, and we're not even going to close out on him, which is, part of my issue is the unwillingness to close out on these shooters at all, even a little bit, to a disrespectful amount.
Well, Denver knows something about that with how we played Lou Dort yesterday.
Right. So, it goes both ways, and I think Denver, their willingness to shoot is really good for something like rhythm. But on a more non-theoretical level, OKC lives in rotation. Like, you watch their defense and you'll see like, oh, yeah, they can send 4 defenders to Jokic when he gets into the paint, because whoever is roaming around the perimeter somewhere is going to be able to make the right rotation, or whoever is responsible for making that X out. It's like they're going to make it. And I feel like Denver, specifically yesterday, was good at keeping Oklahoma City out of rotation. Like, they were never defensively in a position where I felt like, okay, they're getting Denver to play into their hands. It was always like, oh, Shea is already, Jokic has the ball at the, elbow, and Shea's on the weak side corner, and he's helping off of Peyton Watson. Well, they're not even in rotation yet, because Shea is just kind of shading off of him, and Jokic is hitting that pass, and then Peyton Watson's putting up the shot and he's making it. And it's like, well, shoot, OKC didn't even get to do what they wanted to do defensively. It's like they just didn't do what they were supposed to do. They just gave up an open look for nothing. And that's something that I think Denver is really good at against any team, but it definitely plays to OKC, or plays to their strengths against OKC, where it's like they're in an environment where they have to start thinking, oh, crap, like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to help off of this guy, but should I be helping off of this guy? And then obviously what happens after that? You start honoring a Peyton Watson. You start honoring a Christian Brown, which Christian Brown's been a good shooter this year. I'm not even going to act like he's,
well, he's
bad at shooting threes. Right, yeah. He's one of those guys. He's going to make 1 of 5 one night and then 4 of 7 the next. It's definitely not. If there's a guy you're going to help off of, it's probably going to be him and Peyton Watson and obviously Russell Westbrook. But those guys can make their shots, as we saw. And I worry about, we'll talk a little bit more about this with OKC, but OKC is very stubborn with their defensive game plan. And I look at last year with a PJ Washington, where it's like, you help off of these guys, they're going to start making their shots. And Denver loves that. Like, yeah, they're like, we know our personnel. We know that these guys have to shoot if we want to win. And like, if they don't make their threes, we're going to lose. If a couple of them make their threes, we got a pretty good shot because we got Nikola Jokic. Against OKC, that scares me because I have not seen a willingness to adjust. And also, I think Denver's size.
You mean adjust defensively? Yeah,
just defensively.
Okay.
And then also Denver on the offensive end, the size bothers me. Size is always going to be something I talk about with OKC, where I'm just like, guys, you are small. And like Isaiah Hartenstein, even defending Jokic, I'm like, yeah, one-on-one, like Isaiah Hartenstein's a good off-ball defender. Positionally, he knows where to be, and he can block shots at the rim. But like one-on-one against Jokic, I don't like anyone one-on-one against Jokic. That's not a matchup that I'll take. Isaiah Hartenstein, I love you to death. You're a great player, but I don't want you to defend him one-on-one. I know Chet can't do it. So I think that's something that really helps. I think in transition, there was a lot of stuff I liked from Denver that Oklahoma City, I didn't realize how good of a transition defense they were until I looked at the numbers today. But
yeah,
it doesn't feel like they're a good transition defense when they're playing against Denver. I'm like, these guys are really good. And I think part of it is just the size.
We saw that that's true because you're constantly generating cross matches, right? Which, puts them in maybe rotations that they didn't want to be in. Once you, like, let's say you generate them in semi-transition, it's not necessarily like, oh, immediate mismatch, go up for the bucket, but it's like, we've already compromised your defense early. There's this meme going around Twitter right now with Mark Daigneault.
I was wondering if we were going to talk about this.
Why don't I let you elaborate on what Mark Daigneault tried to do to control the pace of the game yesterday, which was the game that Denver won.
Yeah, so Jokic inbounds the ball. And if you've watched any Denver game, you'll see Jokic, like, when he is in an inbound setting, like, he wants the ball. Like, he's almost yelling at the ref, like, give me the ball. He's always trying to inbound it as fast as possible because the Nuggets are so good at playing quick, because when you have a decision maker like Jokic, he's going to read the floor, and within a second, he's going to do something with it to create an advantage. And Mark Daigneault, to counter this, was keeping Dylan Jones at the scorer's table to basically perpetually try and keep Denver from being able to play as quick as they wanted, which I don't know what the rules say about that. I've seen some people say it's against the rules. I've seen some people say it's not. Do what you got to do. I understand that, hey, he got to delay a game for it, so clearly he did something wrong. But I respect the ingenuity of trying something so ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, I can't be mad at this. It's interesting.
So Daigneault, in the post game, as he's describing his strategy, he really placed an emphasis on like, I thought the refs weren't doing a good job controlling the pace of the game, and I'm like, that's odd. I don't think that that's a thing that refs are like quote unquote supposed to do. But someone else did point out that this is very just akin to, Jokic kind of going down and pretending to tie his shoelaces to give the coaches an opportunity to decide to challenge things, or Jokic rolling the ball up the floor. Like, there's all these little tricks that these guys are trying. It was interesting watching Daigneault in the game yesterday, because he's normally this, to my eye, this very like composed guy. And yeah, he gets fired up about stuff and whatever, but he was like beside himself, particularly in the first quarter of this game, very annoyed with the way the officiating was going in terms of contact. And also like trying to figure out this thing with the pace. Like, it was just a little bit more, he looked a little bit more out of sorts than I'm used to seeing him. And that was true even watching it, not knowing the outcome of this game, because obviously I watched it live. I just thought that was very I thought that was very funny. We talked a lot about all these different ways that Denver has these advantages, and I do think that the size is like the main one. I think the size, like you said, just kind of bleeds into other advantages that they could create. So if they decide to play fast in transition, the size can kind of augment that that particular advantage. If they're willing to shoot, let's say MPJ doesn't hesitate on his jumpers, he can just shoot over guys. I actually thought that when it comes to our actual shooters like MPJ and Jamal, OKC did a good job closing out, but they obviously weren't. They were completely ignoring Russ and Christian and Peyton. Eventually they were closing out to Peyton, which was interesting, but they were just making the shots anyway. I saw Chet go for a little cornet contest on Christian Brown in the corner, and that didn't work either. So it was an interesting, I thought it was an interesting set of games, especially because it's not like the role players didn't make shots in the first one. I thought in the first game, it was really Jokic and Jamal that, really struggled in that game. And it wasn't even to necessarily getting to their spots. Like, I thought Jamal generated a bunch of looks that he missed on Sunday and then made on Monday. Jokic, I think, took a dramatically different approach to the game. It was a lot of pick and pops and inverted pick and roll on Sunday. And he was generating a lot of threes out of that, because that's what OKC was willing to live with for a bit, although they would contest the pick and pop some. He was just missing everything. I think he took 10 threes in the game on Sunday.
And he was 1 of 10, right?
2 of 10. I think he made one late. The 3-point shot has not been looking quite as good over the last month as it had when he was, leading the NBA in 3-point percentage. And it's not just the heaves anymore. So that's definitely an issue. And I think as I was kind of writing up my notes for this show, between these two games, I'm just like, well, like, Jokic is going to need to make some shots. Then in game 2, he only took 2 threes. And that was interesting. They basically stopped going to he stopped taking threes off the pick and pop. He was very much like trying to pump fake and drive and generate things out of that more in the second game. And yeah, then Jamal was making shots, and that was good to see. But it was interesting to me that in both of those games, like, our two best players were basically generating shots that they can make. Especially Jamal. Like, that I think is something that we should talk about, because Will and I did our playoff previews before last year's playoffs, and digging into the Oklahoma City film, the thing that was most surprising to me going through all of the matchups of this team over the last 2.5 years was like, Jamal really does get to his spots in this matchup, and he was just not making shots. And yeah, they're all like pull up jump shots, but those are the shots that Jamal takes. It's not like he
Right.
normally gets to the rim and then, wasn't in this matchup. And then we saw on Monday that he's able to make those shots. And that was surprising to me because of how good all of these perimeter defenders are in OKC. They have I think the best perimeter defensive core in the entire NBA, and it's not particularly close, although Orlando has tried, sacrificing offense at all costs to do so. What did you think about the way that OKC defended Jamal in the last 2 games? Do you agree that he basically just made shots that he missed on Sunday? Or do you think there was different process in getting those shots or a difference in how OKC was defending him?
In the first game, part of this could, I don't necessarily think any of this was a deliberate thing, but in the first game, I felt OKC was very locked in, like they showed up defensively, like heads in the right place. Execution was quick and decisive. And they were, with shot creators like Jamal, who are trying to get to their spots, a lot of these guys, they're going to get to their spots one way or another. How much can you make them rush to get there? Can you speed them up through their process? Because it's less about like, we want to deny, some guys, you want to deny them from getting those looks in the first place. But with a guy like Jamal, for me, at least, my impression has always been, if you can speed him up as much as possible and make him rush things, that's when you're going to see the defensive impact on Jamal Murray. And I felt like in game 2, already talking about it like it's a playoff series because it feels inevitable.
I know. It's I like the baseball series. How do you feel about the baseball series that the NBA's been doing more of the last couple of years? Because I kind of like it. I like to see the different adjustments that teams make, feeling one way about a matchup and then things shift, like whatever. Or
I love it. I'm with you. I think it's the best. It's one of my favorite ways for games to happen, where it's like, I feel like you get to dive into, during the regular season, you get to dive into games a little bit more when you have, okay, I'm going to get a sample size of 2 games from these 2 teams where I can really like sink my teeth into it and like try and figure out what they were doing and what adjustments they made. Cause it's like, if, the Kings play the Lakers in November and they don't play again until March, it's like, I don't even remember what happened in November. I got to go back and watch that game now. It's like, it's a lot easier to pay attention and lock into a matchup when you've got that back-to-back game, or not even necessarily a back-to-back. Even if there's like a day in between, I still think it's the best way to present the games, in my opinion. I like it a lot. But the one more thing I will say about Jamal Murray is Jalen Williams, I think being out probably hurt some of this a little bit. Because, I've got a lot of frustrations with Jalen Williams. A great player, drives me nuts sometimes. He is good when it comes to speeding guys up, particularly guys like Jamal Murray, who give him a ball screen.
He affects dribbles so much. He's so
freaking
at batting
long.
The ball away. Yeah. It's such a ridiculous, like, athletic profile. All of these guys are, right? Like, they're athletic freaks. That's why they're, playing at the level that they're at. But J-Dub is, like I think he's like an insane defensive build, because he's kind of like Dort, maybe not quite as strong, but he's incredibly strong, low center of gravity. And then he's got this enormous wingspan. And you're like, okay, what can you do on the perimeter? But then him guarding as like a free safety too, like as a help side guy. I think they really missed him in the second half of game game 2 of the second game of this series. Everything just felt a little bit freer. I liked the process that Denver was going through in both of these games. In particular, one of the things that stood out to me about the first game, where they lost convincingly, was Denver only had 7 turnovers in that game. And that's big, because Denver has been turning the ball over nonstop since the All-Star break. And OKC is the best team at forcing opponent turnovers, live ball turnovers in particular, in the NBA. And I thought that they did a good job of just not playing around with the ball too much and getting the ball to open spots as quickly as possible. So I liked that aspect of Denver's game plan execution in both games, regardless of what OKC was doing defensively. What did you think of that, actually? Because I think that OKC's, as good as their paint defense is, I think that their best, sort of the most elite thing they do is pressure the ball and force turnovers by playing passing lanes and doing all the things that go into forcing turnovers, because that's the thing that makes teams so uncomfortable. It bothers process. And that's why I didn't actually feel quite as bad about the first game as a lot of people did, because it was, like, again, a convincing loss. I was just like, Denver didn't look like, you know, a team that was like deviating from their process because of how OKC was, you know, defending them.
Yeah, game 2 was Denver playing Denver's game. Like, they looked comfortable with their process. They were doing what you would expect the Denver Nuggets to do. But in game 1, the things that, like the Jokic threes, for example, Jokic shooting 2 of 10 from 3. OKC's going to watch Jokic take 10 threes in a game, and they're going to be like, of course, that's the shot we want to give up. Like, yeah, he's a good 3-point shooter, but he's taking 10 threes. It's like, we know we're going to give it up. We know he's probably going to shoot 45% from 3, but he's only going to take, like, what, 4 or 5? We'll live with that. He takes 10 threes, even better. And it's like, that's not their game. But giving Jokic the ball at the elbow, letting the help come off of the weak side and hitting that open shooter, it's like, that's their game. And yeah, you're going to turn it over a little bit, but your process is what has gotten you so much success in the first place. And when you stick to that, you're going to have a lot more success. It's like, Denver's one of the best half-court offenses in the league for a reason. And it's because they have a game plan that works. And when even this is where the balancing act between process and stubbornness is so interesting if you're a coach. It's like, we have this process that works really, really, really well, but OKC is really good theoretically at disrupting our process. Like, yeah, we're going to end up turning the ball over. No, you hear turnovers. You're like, oh, we don't want to turn the ball over. But it's like, yeah, but then you're not going to be able to do things the way that you do them. It's like, you can't change your entire philosophy and your entire approach just because of one matchup. It's like, you need to live with some of the mistakes and the failures that are going to come. It's like, the NFL is a great example when it comes to turnovers. It's like, yeah, you could have a quarterback that, you know, throws one interception per. Look at Josh Allen. Josh Allen, I guarantee you, he's going to throw an interception a game. He's going to fumble the ball a couple of times per game, but he's going to make plays. Jamal Murray's going to turn the ball over every now and then, but they're going to make plays.
Guys.
Exactly.
Essentially, yeah.
And with OKC, they're going to get in a passing lane every now and then. They're going to swipe down on a ball on a driver. But you got to live with it. You can't change your whole game plan just because you don't want OKC to get more turnovers. It's like, no, play your game. And Denver played their game and it worked.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because it reminds me of a game that the Thunder had earlier this year. I believe it was the Knicks game in OKC. Knicks are up at half. The Thunder come storming back at the end of this game, and they take it in the clutch. And something that the Thunder did that a lot of teams do to disrupt the Knicks process was put Isaiah Hartenstein on Josh Hart. And so instead of running their normal stuff, whatever it is, because it's not like the Knicks have one thing that they do. They were running a lot of pick and roll with Josh Hart as the roller. They're like, well, Josh, I want to take Hart and drop and, attack him in space. And so to do that, we have to use Josh Hart as the roller. And I was really critical of Tibbs going to that adjustment, because it's one thing to counter what another team's doing, with like, okay, we're adjusting to counter to that. But if it completely takes you out of what you do, and what ended up happening is Josh Hart is not able to make plays from the middle of the floor. I thought OKC defended those actions really well, and they weren't able to score, and that's how the Thunder got the win in that game. What it meant was Cat didn't touch the ball down the stretch of that game, once. There was one possession, I think, he gets a cross match in transition on and the seal, gets the ball, immediately scores. didn't touch the ball the rest of the game. And I thought they were able to completely take him out of that game because I think the Knicks didn't do well enough to. I think your adjustments should always end up playing to your strengths. Like if something that the other team is doing is keeping the ball out of your best player's hands, your adjustments should be something that you do to get the ball back into your best player's hands and make sure that they're the ones making plays. So that actually brings me to my next question here, which has to do with, the same kind of concept. I've been incredibly skeptical and critical of teams that go small against the Thunder, whether it's taking their center off the floor or going like 3-guard lineups, etc. But in this last game, obviously Denver shoots 56% from 3, and that definitely helps, right? But there's this Thunder fan account who he also does, like playbacks, Jace Hoops, who suggested that going smaller around Jokic in that game actually helped Denver because it scuffed the game plan that OKC had, which was really centered around defending Jokic in the post, right? How do you feel about, that idea? When we talked so much about how Denver's main matchup advantage here is the size, but how do you feel about Denver, going small against OKC? And then more broadly, this philosophy of, adjusting, particularly for a playoff matchup and like what it means for, like what it says about your personnel. Like, are you saying, well, the guys that we have aren't like versatile enough in themselves when you do that? And do you end up taking like your best players off the floor potentially when you do that?
I think there is some psychological games going on when you talk about, who's going to be the first to pull a guy who can only operate and drop.
Who calls
who's going to be the first
time out?
Who's going to be the first one to take Zubats off the floor,
Yeah.
Like that whole year-old debate, Steven Adams, insert drop big here. That's always a story in the playoffs. And, it's important to make those adjustments. And like you said, and like we've discussed already, you can get married to those game plans too much and end up shooting yourself in the foot. You can keep Josh Giddey in the series for 3 more games than you should have and keep letting him shoot open corner threes. And then you end up in a Dallas Mavericks series where you guys end up getting bounced in the second round. And I look at a coach like Mark Daigneault and I'm like, those are the adjustments where I'm concerned of, where like certain players, you don't need to change your entire process to take certain players off the floor. It's like your process can still remain, like you said, you're not sacrificing your best players just to maintain your ability to have what's given you so much success. As far as going small goes, my specific concerns with OKC, it has a lot to do with Chet and his comfort level on the offensive end. Defensively, defensively, the Thunder are going to live and die by their game plan defensively. They have an identity, and whether it's Hartenstein on the floor, whether it's Chet on the floor, whether it's Jalen Williams, the other one on the floor, they're going to do their defense how they've done it, and they'll live and die by it. I don't see a ton of changes there. But offensively, we have this view of Chet, or at least, I say we in a very nebulous sense of like the general public has this view of Chet that he's this very, very efficient stretch big who, hardly misses. And I'm like, this is harsh language, but he is a much more timid offensive player than people realize. He is generally kind of scared to shoot. He does not have a quick release at all. He has an uncomfortable looking shot, even though the percentages.
Especially not now that Drew Hanlen's gotten to.
Yeah, don't even get me started on that. That scares me to death. But I look at Chet and like the idea of going small, and it's like, yeah, defensively, OKC's going to do their thing, but offensively, it's like Denver is already theoretically defensively deficient against this OKC team. But if Denver, an already an elite offensive team, doubles down on their offense, does OKC have the ability to keep up with that? The numbers, yeah, we can look at the numbers and be like, yeah, they've been one of the best half-court offenses in the league this year. They're like top 5 in half-court offense. It's like, yeah, but is that enough to keep up with small ball Denver Nuggets with Jokic on the floor? in the playoffs? I don't know.
So in the game yesterday, we were just talking about this, how if they're doing something that's like making your best player's life hard, you should do something to make your best player's life a little bit easier. And, the Nuggets were running all these high traps to get the ball out of SGA's hands. I felt like last year, and maybe it's also true this season, a lot of the time, like this is not a new concept for teams guarding SGA. But a lot of the time when teams would run this, like Mark would just have someone else bring the ball up and get SGA moving off ball. And I think he's like a deadly off ball like attacker if you can create even like the tiniest window of space for him, right? They don't have, Josh Giddey was a bit more of a primary initiator creator and kind of took a little bit of that burden off of him, but he wasn't really like an advantage creator. He was able to just kind of make it easier for SGA to like get to his spots, right?
Right.
Not like having to give up the ball as soon as he crossed the timeline. Yesterday, the plan was to just move the ball, get it to the open guy, and have him take shots. And it worked. The Thunder had the exact same offensive rating in game 2 as they did in game 1. The exact same. It was like 128.3 offensive rating. And Dort made 8 threes, right? So like he did make Denver pay, but completely got Oklahoma City out of what they do. And they weren't really able to get back to that ever. How different is it actually to how Dallas really got the Thunder out of what they do in the playoffs? Because on the one hand, SGA was still going off in that series, but you didn't have everyone else. And obviously in this game that we're talking about versus Denver, it was the complete opposite. Or do you just not see, you saw it as like they didn't really make an adjustment. They just played right into what the defense was giving them.
There were a lot of instances where, specifically a lot of Alex Caruso possessions, where I was like, huh.
Yeah, there's a lot of Alex Caruso in that game.
I was like, what's that all about?
He's killing us right now.
And like, I look at the percentages for Alex Caruso in game 2, where like he was 5 of 8 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3. But like the thing that stuck out to me was he had 3 turnovers and he had the ball in his hands a lot. And I was like, why does Alex Caruso have the ball in his hands this much? And I think that speaks to Denver, not necessarily like you said, they had the same offensive rating that they had in the first game. But I think when you're able to cap a team like OKC at that 128 and you're an offense like Denver where your ceiling is so much higher, it's like if you are successful at keeping Shea from getting 20 shots in a game, if you are making Lou Dort take 16 shots and making Lou Dort get his game off, then yeah, you're not going to be able to keep up with an offense like Denver, especially when Denver is able to kind of mitigate some of your defense by going small and playing into the fact that you're not letting them get set, that you're playing with such a quick pace. All of that is stuff that I'm just like, yeah, the Thunder might just not match up super well, because not necessarily a bad matchup, but in terms of who they want to see in the playoffs, it's like Denver's pretty high on the list of teams they don't want to see, just because Denver has such a right hook that OKC is not, I don't want to say not capable of defending, but they can only defend it some of the time. And that's the beauty of Denver's offense to me, is like when it's on, and it really doesn't matter what you do.
I think like the Jamal Murray of all of this is really, really the important part of it. You can stop a team from getting open shots. Like you can contest everything, all of that. And I even think like, I mean, when Jokic's elbow was the way that it was on Sunday, because he just like couldn't hit a drop in the ocean. In that game from 3 or like from anywhere, he really struggled. I think he shot sub 40% from the floor in that game. But like when Jamal Murray is on, it's just like you can't let this guy get to his spots comfortably, because if he's on, then like those are just shots that you're like, what am I supposed to do about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk a bit about OKC's actual matchup advantages, right? Because we talked about, all these things like, okay, this is what Denver could do. This is like something that gives Oklahoma City trouble. But OKC is the best, like in my opinion, best team in the league. The only reason that they don't have the best record right now is because Cleveland's in the East. Like I believe that very firmly. In a potential playoff series, SGA is a problem because, like you said, like, yeah, you can cap their ceiling at 128 offensive rating if, Dort hits 8 threes and all this, which, may not happen, but also could if everything is open. Like you're saying, if you leave shooters open, rhythm is a thing and they're going to eventually, make those shots. But do you think that, considering how good OKC's defense is, and I do think that they're a little bit more versatile than maybe you're giving them credit for right now, even in a Denver matchup, but do you think that Denver's issues would be more offensive or defensive in that series, especially considering the state of their shooting right now? Like, yeah, they shot 56% from 3 one game, but they shot like 32% the game before and got waxed.
Yeah, I think one of the big advantages for OKC is like you look at the second half of game 1 and OKC just started pouring it on and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. With Denver, it's weird because they kind of have the opposite problem of like sometimes it takes a really long time to get going, but once they get going, they start pouring it on. Oklahoma City is going to be in a lot of opportunities in a theoretical playoff matchup where they can
play from ahead,
bury Denver early, which, I'm talking like 30-point leads, not 20. 20-point leads mean nothing in the NBA anymore. Like if OKC is able to get ahead early, I think that's something they're capable of doing, particularly when you look at the non-Jokic minutes. OKC is very well equipped to deal with that just by nature of having a lot of guys who can shoot. They can have J-Dub on the floor without Shea. Those minutes can be staggered. They've got like the simplicity of an Isaiah Joe and an Isaiah Hartenstein DHO that they can go to with more predominantly bench minutes.
Right. They have things they can go to, unlike Denver.
Yeah.
Bench. Like,
right. It's not like they're just praying like, oh, somebody do something.
Yeah.
They've got little pet actions that they can go to. And I think that helps a lot. The size is a factor for sure, but I think there is something to be said just for top to bottom defensive personnel, assuming guys like Jay Will are probably out of the playoff rotation. If I had to guess, he probably will be, or like a 10, 15 minute a game guy.
I want to ask you about that because big Jalen Williams, Jay Will, he started the second half in the second game of this baseball series in place of Isaiah Hartenstein. I think that Daigneault probably wanted to have him just popping more and have Jokic have to like guard someone out on the perimeter was the idea there. That worked in the first game, by the way. Like he was making all his threes. In the second game, he was not making his threes. But I thought Hartenstein was doing a really good job offensively, in particular in the first half of this last game. So I didn't really understand why Daigneault made that change. Was it just he likes to play around with things? Or was there something that you saw with the Hartenstein minutes in the first half that kind of justified that to you?
So I'm kind of with you. I don't understand it, but I do understand why it happened. In the sense that Daigneault has said incessantly, like he's been asked all year, like you play a lot of lineups and you play a lot of different lineups that sometimes don't make very much sense. Why? And he said, because I want to have as much data as possible and know exactly what every possible combination in every possible context looks like. Like he needs to see what something looks like in order to know like, okay, does this have legs or not? And I think that was probably a situation where he was like, let's see what happens. Throw Jay Will out there and see what he can do. But the problem to me with Jay Will is not necessarily like offensively, he's okay offensively. Like, yeah, if he hits his threes, cool. But that's kind of a hit or miss. Like he attempts 2 or 3 a night. It's not like a significant volume, not enough to meaningfully impact the team's spacing overall. Like he's going to be the guy getting helped off of. Yeah, he can make some decent passes. He's an okay DHO guy whenever he's looking to do that. But defensively is where I look at him and I'm just like, yeah, you might, get Jokic pulled out on the perimeter more, but what's he doing on the defensive end against Jokic? And it's less about what are you doing against Jokic, because I'll tell you what you're doing against Jokic. Nothing. It's Jokic. You're not stopping him. I don't care if it's Hartenstein out there. I don't care if it's I don't care if it's prime Hakeem out there. You're not stopping Jokic. But what does J. Will mean for everybody else on the floor on Denver's offense? It's like he is slow-footed. He is not able to close out. He has some pretty poor off-ball defensive instincts. He's prone to falling asleep. That's where I look at him and I'm like, yeah, he might be marginally better offensively, but defensively the gap is just so wide and also plays into Denver's strengths so much. Where like Denver, they catch you sleeping for 1 second, they're at the rim. You're screwed. It's too late. That pass has already been made, and Peyton Watson is already dunking it. Aaron Gordon's already dunking it. Insert player here. They're already getting an open layup or a dunk, or they're getting an open shot. It's like Jay Will is just not equipped for those environments, especially against a team like Denver that is just so smart in the half court.
Yeah, I guess he kind of goes against the like fly aroundness that makes the OKC's defense what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. I always love hearing about everyone has their gripes about their team, even the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's funny that you mentioned Denver's bench, and we talked about like conceptually, OKC's bench has things that they can go to, and the non-Jokic minutes have been this perpetual scab that Denver's been trying to pick and, figure out, basically. But it feels like whenever they play the Thunder in particular, and there are some other teams in the league that, that are similar, but it feels like the non-Jokic minutes are never as bad against the Thunder as against everyone else. For example, so far, Denver has been able to in their 3-4 matchups this year been able to play Zeke Naji, Hunter Tyson, Julian Strother, and Jalen Pickett in those games largely without issue. Like if Denver loses the game, it's not really because of the non-Jokic minutes. And I'm curious if you think there's something about the Thunder that makes Denver's bench less vulnerable against OKC than they are against.
I don't know if it's something about Denver's bench specifically, but I've noticed this against other teams as well. It's glaringly apparent against Denver just because you would think, oh, Jokic is off the floor. This is when teams go on big, massive runs. But it doesn't happen with OKC that much.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem. It certainly doesn't feel that way. I'm sure they have gone on, 10, maybe 15-point runs here and there, but it doesn't feel like that is a consistent factor in these matchups. And to me, it's because of kind of what we've been talking about, where like OKC's got this offense that like is the ceiling is really high, but that's the ceiling. It doesn't go past that. It's this, and it's not going to go much higher. And I feel like to me that is because, one, the way the rotations actually go, where like Shea plays, I think it's like 6 minutes in the first quarter, goes to the bench, 6 minutes in the sits the first 6 minutes of the second quarter, comes out last 6 minutes, something like that.
I think he's been playing the whole first quarters a lot, and then like sits the whole first 6 minutes of the second.
I think that's what it is.
Like you don't have SGA versus benches when Jokic is also doing that. I think we used to do like last 2 minutes of the first quarter, maybe he'd come out, but now it's like Jokic the entire first. So, and that's been the case all year, which is partially why his minutes were kind of up for relative to beginning of the season kind of minutes load. But it also meant that like stars who had a similar substitution pattern weren't going against our bench, which maybe explains the slight increase in quality. Maybe that's too generous of the non-Jokic minutes this year.
I with OKC, the problem that I see is like you look at Shea and J-Dub specifically, where their games are, you know, somewhat predicated on tough shot making. Not entirely. I don't want to diminish them to just like, oh, they're just tough shot guys. They don't get open looks. Like, they're both great drivers and can capitalize on space so well. And they can generate open looks for themselves at the rim a lot. You know, not taking that away, but when those guys aren't on the floor, and even when they are on the floor in things like the non-Jokic minutes, it's like, well, some of that is still just tough shot making. And like, if the shot's not going in, then you're not going to capitalize on the fact that Jokic isn't on the floor. And the same goes for like, okay, Jokic goes to the bench, Shea goes to the bench, J-Dub goes to the bench. None of those guys are on the floor. Jamal Murray's not on the floor.
Yeah.
Whatever the case is.
Non-SGA, non-Jalen Williams minutes in both of these games that didn't go well for OKC and Daigneault. And I don't know why they do that. I don't know why you guys do
Your guess is as good as mine.
But there'd be a timeout, and then Daigneault gets Jada back in the game like pretty quickly.
Well, it's like we talked about Isaiah Joe and Hartenstein DHOs, and it's like, yeah, you have that in the non-Jokic minutes, but that's still it's a high points per possession context, but it is still subject to, over the course of an entire game, streakiness.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you could shoot 0 of 3 on Isaiah Joe DHOs in the first half, and then shoot 3 of 4 in the second. And it's like, well, how many of those were the non-Jokic minutes, and how much did it allow you to capitalize on the fact that that wasn't on the floor? Could you put the hammer down? And that's where I'm like, you know, I have concerns about OKC against any team when stars aren't on the floor. It's like, how much are they able to build these leads that can actually put teams away in those environments?
I think that's a good point. Like, it's nice having Hartenstein being able to like kind of run those units with neither of J-Dub or SGA on the floor. He's really good as like a hub, but like you said, it's more subject to streakiness. Whereas maybe ironically, the tough shot making of Jalen Williams and SGA provides such a floor and like a consistency that doesn't let you like fall too far behind, even if they're missing some of those shots, right?
Right.
I really love that discussion about this matchup. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about OKC and Denver potentially having a playoff series? Like, maybe they meet in the Western Conference Finals. They're currently 1 and 2 in the West right now. I think that would be a very interesting series. Incredibly scary for me, because I just think OKC has shown themselves to be the overall, you know, better team right now. Even though we've discussed the flaws and vulnerabilities in both of these teams, it's really just about who can maximize the thing that they do best more.
Well, that's kind of why I am excited. The last thing I'll say about this series or potential series is that's why I think it's so exciting, because yes, adjustments will be made, but I think it will be, like we discussed, a lot of adjustments that play into maximizing what you do really well and keeping the ball in the hands of your best players. And like, I look at, I don't know if your audience is, if you're a UFC fan or if your audience is any UFC fans out there, but it was, I think it was Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje, but there was a point at the end of that fight where Max Holloway just like pointed at the center of the ring, and he was like, we're going to throw hands for the last round of this match till one of us gets knocked out. And I feel like that's how it will be for OKC and Denver, where it's just like, we're going to go blow for blow, and like my best look versus your best look, and we're going to see who wins. And I think that's just heavyweight title fight.
It's really nice to hear a Thunder fan talk about it like that, because over in Nuggetsville, there's been a lot of doom and gloom, as well as some delusional optimism in my opinion. But you know, Denver, like every time I think they're out, they pull me back in, right? Like, you can never really count this team out. Anyway, Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This was such a fun discussion. It's really nice, actually, like really nice talking to a Thunder fan and hearing someone have like reverence for my team that I've been kind of shitting on all year.
First of all, thank you guys for having me. Really enjoyed talking hoops, and I've been labeled as like the most pessimistic Thunder fan, so I'm always the I guess, devil's advocate when it comes to the Thunder. So I'll happily wear that hat.
I vaguely recall a quick like discussion that we had during the Dallas Mavericks series where you were like, why isn't Daigneault calling a timeout during these runs that the Mavs are going on? And I said, like, because Daigneault knows that as soon as Lively leaves the floor, the Thunder are going to go on a run of their own. I don't know if he actually knew that, but that was basically like where the series was decided, was how many minutes is Lively playing versus Gafford and vice versa.
Right.
Well, if you like our content, please remember to click the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. Thanks again, Alex, for coming on the show. And, you know, maybe you'll enjoy this, but our closing tagline is to always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks.
Love it.